Hello, you're listening to the Beer Ladies podcast with your hosts Tandy, Katie, Christina, and me, Lisa. Our website is beerladiespodcast.com, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, Blue Sky, even TikTok, sometimes at Beer Ladies Pod and at Beer Ladies Podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support the show, you can find our merch store link in any of our bios or check the show notes for this episode. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode, please email us at beerladiespodcast@gmail.com. Now, back to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. My name is Tandy, and I am joined by co-host Christina. And we have got a wonderful guest for you all to listen to today, and this is Ali Dunworth. Ali, do say hi.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Now, for those who don't know, firstly, where have you been living? What rock are you, hiding under? Because Ali is very, very well known, especially within the sort of food, drinks, travel, festival, Epicurean almost, culture here in Ireland as a, food writer primarily, Ali. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but food,
Yeah.
drink, and travel, writing, journalist, consultant, events curator. You do a lot of work with festivals that we've been to, some of them that you've curated for. But we're really going to talk to you today primarily about your very first book.
Yeah, I have it here beside me.
There
Always.
it is. We're delighted. So a Compendium to Irish Pints.
Yes.
And we'll get more into that in a second, because it's very exciting and we're very proud of you. So awesome.
Thank you.
But first things first, let's talk about our beverages. Christina, you're not drinking today. That's cool. That's cool. We welcome everybody here. So Ali, what have you got tonight? What are you drinking?
Well, I technically thought I should have a pint, but I didn't have anything pint worthy at home. And I had a beer tucked away that someone gave me as a present, and I thought it would impress you guys, so I thought I'd open it. I don't know if it will. It's
Ooh.
called, I had to write down how to pronounce it. Trappist Westflaterren.
Oh yes.
So
There's Feltzrin, I think.
Westflatter.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
I've not seen that particular bottle.
and I have a
Oh,
glass.
beautiful glass with it too.
So when I had my book launch last week, and a friend of mine who is very into drinks, he gave me this and another bottle and said, "These are very, very special. Have those when you've finished the launch and you feel like you want to have a drink." So I saved it up for this. So I gotta
That's
see what it's
awesome.
like. Yeah.
Oh, we're honored, and I hope you enjoy it. Do you like a Belgian style beer every now and then?
Yeah, I kind of like all beer. Well,
Yeah.
all beer, not all beer, but I like
Yeah.
most beer. Beer with taste.
Okay, big
So
flavors.
we'll see what this is like. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, since we are primarily going to be talking about pints, and for those not in Ireland, pints generally means Guinness. So there it is, pints of Guinness. So I've got a Guinness pint. For those who drink Guinness at home like I do, it comes in a can. There are varieties that come in cans. You get Nitro Surge, and you get this kind of sort of plain one that's got the widget in it. I tend to buy those. I like them better than the Nitro Surge, but there it is, good old pint of Guinness in my Guinness glassware. It's like one of the only brands that I can always match glassware to, thank goodness, because these
Yeah.
glasses are everywhere.
Oh, and I have a big chapter on the glasses in the book, so we can talk
Good to
about
know. Good to know. Okay, I mean we're very excited to talk about your book, but let's first understand a little bit more about you. So Ali, tell us a bit about your history. How did you get into food, beer, writing, drinks, travel?
I grew up, I suppose, in a very foodie house. So I was always into food, but I don't think you realized it could be something that you could really have a career in. And I studied journalism, and I moved to London, and I ended up working in TV. Well, while I was studying, I started working in restaurants, and I really fell in love with, like, that was London in the early 2000s. So restaurants and chefs. I read Kitchen Confidential. I was obsessed with that world. And when I graduated, I just said to my kind of coordinator, I wanted to work in food TV, and it wasn't really a thing, but it was. I found it, and I found my tribe, and I worked in food TV in the UK for maybe like 10 years. And in between that, I was doing a lot of cooking, so doing a lot of behind the scenes. So you kind of work a lot with the home ec, you're learning more and more about food. And when I left London, I went to Australia. And then when I came back to Ireland, the food TV work wasn't really the same here. So I started freelancing in different worlds and cooking and doing events and just started writing. But I had essentially been writing the entire time. I was writing just for television. So then I started to write more online and then ended up writing in print. So that sort of brought me to where I am in Dublin.
Oh, it sounds amazing. It actually sounds a little bit like my own dream job, I think, if I had to have one. Being, yeah, writing about things, but also making up recipes and testing new stuff. Like, I think it's so fun.
Yeah, no, it's a good world to be in.
Mm.
Yeah.
So then what led you to, deciding to write about beer? You've written a lot about food in many of your articles. So why pints? Why pint culture? Why that?
I kind of feel I didn't realize, but now since I published the book, I'm, be called maybe a drinks writer. And I wouldn't have considered myself a drinks writer before because I am friends with a lot of drinks writers who have like encyclopedic knowledge of wines or beers. And I think my writing is very much about the culture. And it's the same when I write about food. I don't like critique, I don't write really detailed stuff. I always write about the culture of restaurants and the world around it. And it was the same with this. It was more the world around the drink and not really. There is, of course, references to drinks in the book, but I think people thought it was either going to be a list of pubs or a list of pints, and it's neither. It's a list of things that come along with the culture of pints and pubs. So literally, I was at another book launch talking to Kristen Jensen, who's the publisher, and we were at a party. It was J.R. Ryle's Ballymaloe dessert launch in Ballymaloe, and it was very lovely. And there was canapes and champagne, but over in the corner there was a bar, and they were doing pints of Guinness. And I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get a pint. That's where all the crack is. Everybody's having fun there." And I think I just was going on about that a little bit much because I'd had a few drinks. And Kristen said, well, maybe there's a book in this because you have a lot to say about pints. And yes, she said, do you want to send me some notes or a table of contents? And when I sat down to write about it, there was just so much. And I still to this day, I'm like, oh, now that it's published, I'm like, okay, I'm missing loads of chapters because things come up and you go, I forgot to put that in. I forgot to put that in. But yeah, so it's
Oh,
kind of an
yeah.
accidental drink book writing, but I'm very glad that that's what my first book is.
Yeah. I mean, some of the best ideas are those that are had over pints. This very
Yes.
podcast is one of those ideas.
Yeah, yeah. And we have so many
Can
more
you
of them that never come to fruition. But when they come to fruition, you're like, yeah, that was good. We should keep drinking because more good things will come.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
absolutely. Can you tell us like just for the listeners just a brief overview of the book, like what kind of things we're talking about, and then we can delve into more specific things, but just like overview nutshell what's the book about.
Yeah, so I called it a compendium, which I didn't realize wasn't something that loads of people use. I just remember from when you were a kid, you'd have like, I remember having compendiums of whatever you'd be nerdy about, or an annual, you'd have those collections of things you were interested in. So it just suited that I could then write whatever I wanted. And I ended up doing an A to Z just to give it some sort of structure because it literally was just my thoughts. And then I was like, okay, can I make something A, B, C, D? And it made me pull out some stories that maybe I wouldn't have before. But it's really a lot of it is about the occasion of pints. So, like, the start is after work pints, airport pints. Then it goes into beer mats because if you talk about Irish pints, you have to talk about beer mats. And it will go on to like the smoking ban, which was a big part of pub life in Ireland. And yeah, wedding pints. There's a lot of holy or ecumenical pints, as I call them. Um, and it does go into drinks because I have a big chapter there. Probably the biggest ones, I suppose, are the brand loyalty, where I talk about why we're obsessed with brand drinks in Ireland. And also, I think the history one, I was really nervous, and I'd be nervous about people like Christina reading my history section because well, because I'm not a historian. And like as a journalist and as a writer, you're constantly referencing history, but you don't always have the tools or the language to write about it. So that I found was hard, but I hope I did a good job of it. I tend to over research. So I think it's over 200 pages. And when people get their hands on the book, they go, oh, I didn't realize there's going to be so much into it. And if I had my way, it would have been 400. I had like a lot more written on it, but we had to kind of condense it down.
Mm.
Yeah. So I don't know if that gives you an overview. There's a lot in it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think maybe as you were saying, from just the name, I think I would have assumed something like what pints are available in Ireland today, or what are the popular ones? Where do you see them? That sort of thing. But as I started looking more into the book, it is, as you said, it's much more about the cultures and the customs around having a pint. And
Yeah.
I think Christina and I can both appreciate this kind of book as foreigners. We've both been here for a long time, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's such a unique perspective on your sort of Irish customs. It's almost like this should be given to you at the airport when you land,
Yeah.
I am trying to get it into the airport. I would love that.
I think there's something there because from what little I've been able to read, or from other reviews and things, there is just so much inside knowledge. And sometimes with culture, a lot of it is inherent and it's not easily expressed.
Yeah, and I think it was when I suppose you have a more of an appreciation for it as I got older and having lived away from Ireland for a long time. And like when I left Ireland in my early 20s, I wouldn't have thought there was any, I enjoyed the pub. I always enjoyed the pub, but I wouldn't have thought there was anything particularly special about it until I went to the UK and I was like, oh my God, the pubs here are like, sorry to anybody, there is some really good pubs, but there's such a different culture. And
Yes.
Irish pubs to me are much more democratic spaces, and they're much more gender balanced spaces than you see in a lot of even I lived in Australia for a while and I loved going to the pub in Australia and they really liked the pub, but the pubs there are really, really blokey. And I think in Ireland we do a very good job of, like, the pub belongs to everybody and it's not for the young and it's not for the old and it's not for just men. So it is, I think I started thinking about all those things that made the Irish pub culture unique. And like, there's a lot of things.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Christina, you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, because that was one of the things that really struck me when I was, and I have my notes here, like looking over like the things that you were talking about is, you know, the concept of even what an old man pub is so very Irish, which was something that, like, yes, as a foreigner, when I immigrated here, that was something that I learned, and it's definitely a very, for me, very specific Irish thing alongside, other things that you talk about, like the snug.
Mm.
So yeah, it just so interesting. Can you explain both of those things to our audience if they aren't familiar with what old man pubs are or what snugs are and what pints in them, like kind of hints of
Yeah.
what that might be like?
Well, the old man pub is a very special thing, and it's the pub that I suppose there's two kinds of pubs. When people think of Ireland, they think of the pub. And a lot of the time they think of the pub they see on the television and movies, the Temple Bar version, which is grand if you're a tourist, go and experience it. The same way we go to New York, we want to see Times Square. You go to Paris, you want to see the Eiffel Tower. You come to Ireland, you want to see a pub in Temple Bar. But the pubs that we actually drink in are not those pubs. They're not like full of like diddly eye. Well, music is good, but they're not as twee as you think, and they're much more plain. And there's that very vernacular kind of architecture in them where a lot of it is not very much, it might not have much furniture, it might be unchanged. I think everybody will think of different things when they think of their favorite old man pub, but for me, it needs to be a bit unchanged for when you imagine it could have been there for, and it probably has been there for 200, sometimes longer than that. And it might have the original floor, the original bar, the original ceilings. There's probably a lot of wood. Depending on where you are, there might be like a turf fire. And the drinks offering should be pretty straightforward. The service is a particular thing as well, because it should be really good service, but you should feel a little bit when you walk in that you're intruding just for a minute, and everybody turns and looks at you, and then you're okay, you settle in, and then people will talk to you or they won't, depending on how you feel. And there's loads of other things. So some of them are grocer pubs, and they might have like dog food and toilet paper and light bulbs on one wall, because a lot of the pubs used to be dual functioning. So they might have been a shop or a hardware store. So that's another old man sort of trait in a pub. But there's loads of versions of them, and they're really particularly Irish. I don't think they exist anywhere else in the world. And yeah, I was really nice, I think, when I was writing this, to realize that I'm not cataloging all of them. I'm cataloging my idea of them and my version of them, and that will keep on changing. And I think like we should appreciate it more. But that was the old man's pubs. And then what was the other one you were saying about?
Snugs.
And snugs. And again, I love a snug. And again, these are two things that when I wrote in the book, I've written in the book quite a few times about my relationship with the pubs as a woman and as a drinker, and that, you know, pubs were not spaces that were made for us originally. And one of the traits of an old man's pub also is that if there's a woman's toilet, it's probably stuck onto the side or down a long corridor, because they wouldn't have had a woman's toilet when they were built. So those very old pubs always have a very weird, don't be expecting any fancy loos. And the snug is another thing that still survives in pubs, a lot of the pubs originally, and that would have been a hidden away space for maybe with a couple of benches where women could drink. So when women weren't allowed to drink in the pubs, they might be allowed into the snug for a drink, for like a glass of porter, or the priest might have drank in there, or say when, you know, maybe a soldier who wasn't meant to be in there might drink in there. And those spaces still exist. And like, there is an irony in that they're my favorite place in the pub to drink, and they were originally the place that I would have only been allowed in. But when you get into a snug, like, you feel like you're in on a secret. You're like, you don't want to
Yeah.
leave, and it feels really special.
It is really special, and often the most coveted spot in the pub. So
Always.
you know,
Yeah.
if you get into the pub and the snug isn't taken, like, you're too early to be there. That's just
Yeah.
it.
Yes. And
Or if it's not taken, you beeline for it.
Yes,
I
and you
write
absolutely beeline for it.
like I'm well known in my group of friends for like I will seek out the snug no matter where we go. And one of my friends, Shane, a couple of years ago, we were in Dingle, where there's a lot of very good snugs, but you have to be wily about getting them. And he said, "Oh my God, Ali is the snug cuckoo." Because when we go in there, you might be sitting there, but I'm going to get the snug off you. I'm going to figure out a way to get in there. I'm not
That's a
afraid.
handy skill.
I'm not afraid. And especially in somewhere like Dingle, where there's tourists and they're moving along. So you might spot a couple that look like they're maybe American or visiting, and they're only going to have one drink. And you pop your head in and say, are you finishing up soon? Or do you mind if we join you? And
Yeah.
sometimes they stay with you for the evening, which can be great fun. And sometimes you get the snug. And then you send the text out to everybody you know and say, we've got the snug.
I love that. And you know, speaking of snugs and old man pubs, now recently you wrote an article, or it was featured in Image, so that would have been last week. And this was called a brief history of women, pubs, and
Yeah.
pints. And there was something in it that resonated so much with me. And it is something that you just mentioned earlier. It's like when you walk into one of these pubs, kind of an old man pub, everybody kind of turns to look at you. And
Yeah.
you feel a little bit like you're intruding on something that you don't belong. And this happened to me once, just my sort of local down the road. It was my first time going there, and the building is actually quite big. And you know, these things are always deceptive, because actually pubs are often much bigger than what they look like.
Yeah.
But I didn't know which door to go in, so I went through the one that I thought was going to be, the bar, or whatever the case is.
Okay.
Well, it was the bar, but it was the kind of the bar where only the old men sit.
Yeah.
And then there was the kind of common area, different door. And
Yeah.
that was where, the men, women, kids, sports, that sort of stuff was on. So I walked in there, even with my husband, and all of these kind of old guys turned to look at us, and we were like, oh. And I felt super awkward, walked straight out, and I thought, crap, need to find a new door. But it really is a thing.
It is a thing. And I like, you never don't feel awkward when you do that. But I consciously try and fight really hard against that, because the only way, like, it shouldn't be like that in this day and age, where you feel uncomfortable walking into a space just because you're a woman. And the truth of the matter is, if you sit down and have a drink, dissipate in a moment, and they'll be so interested in you, and they'll be so happy that someone different is sitting at the bar. So you do have to push yourself to,
Yes.
and sometimes you're not in the mood. Sometimes you're just like, I don't want anyone to ask me a question or look at me, so I will just go and sit somewhere where I won't get bothered. But like, the thing about those spaces is like they're becoming less and less. And I think I say, I write a lot in the book about Instagram and taking photos of pints. And I was like there's going to be very few corners of a pub left that someone hasn't taken a picture of a pint in or a selfie in those places. And that's a good thing, because they shouldn't belong to anybody. But that's a hangover, because a pub that you're describing there, it would have been that way always. So when the pubs first started letting women in Ireland, which I think, and again, not a historian, only wrote the bits that are in my book that I got from other people's research, that like even in the 60s, when women were starting to be allowed in Dublin pubs, there would have been a lounge built for the women, and they would have been the comfortable spaces, and they would have been more cushioned chairs, and the men would have been left with the quieter spaces with the high stools and sitting at the bar. And there's still places in Dublin where it was like that up until the 90s, I believe, some very popular bars. And I think there's definitely places like that in Dublin, in Ireland, everywhere, that we don't know about, because they're not necessarily the pubs that we're going to go to.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, yeah, it's a unique thing that is not going to last for much longer, I'd say.
It is interesting, and I think you're right in that if you just kind of pushed past your own, feeling of being a little uncomfortable or a little examined, you'd actually probably have great conversations with these people, because
Yeah.
actually often, now correct me if I'm wrong, but often, and what I've seen with these kinds of spaces, it's often a bunch of old men, they're sitting in parallel because, they're sitting at the bar. They're
Yeah.
not necessarily talking to each other.
No.
They're actually just sitting, and they're enjoying their own pint, which is lovely, which is great. But I mean, sometimes, adding a little bit of something new in there could spark a bit of conversation and life, and,
And I always
for
say
some
that,
that would be great.
I always say, and this is probably a really Irish thing, like I wouldn't do that in my own town. Like I wouldn't go downtown and go to that bar that I know, because I might know somebody. But if I'm in the west of Ireland and I'm feeling like I'm on like my Irish mini break, whatever, I will walk into, I won't think twice about doing that in the west of Ireland, but I will be conscious of doing it in my hometown or in Dublin, which is interesting. Because
Interesting.
and I imagine it's the same, that like tourists walk into these bars all the time and don't know any different, and they have a great time chatting with like the barflies, the locals, the regulars. So, but I do write as
Yeah.
well about that push to, I don't know if you often go for a pint on your own. Do either of you?
I certainly have.
But again,
It has happened, but not
Mm.
I don't normally do that.
and not necessarily actively the way a lot more men might just go for a pint on their own.
Mm.
And again, I consciously always fought against that, because, and I remember going for my first pint on my own when I'm going to say I was 18 or 19, in the Bleeding Horse on Camden Street. And I brought my newspaper with me, and I just did it because I thought that I'm not supposed to do this. But I still do it now, and it still feels weird sometimes, or not weird. You still have that awkwardness that you're talking about, where you're like, okay, there's only certain places that you might go and have a pint on your own.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I'm thinking about it, like I don't really, I have done it occasionally when I travel, but it's definitely not something that I have done, because when I was researching my own book, there's still that attitude of like, oh, a woman alone at a bar with a pint, it's dangerous. Like that's just so beat into my head. Even though, it might be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there's just something about that still, my brain is just like, whoop.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to change that. So encourage everybody to go for a pint on your own.
I agree. I actually love a pint on my own, but I can't really pick out times when I literally left my house to go and have a pint on my own. It's often I'll go have a pint because I've got an hour to spare between
Yeah.
something, or
Yeah.
I'm waiting for something, or whatever the case is. It's kind of a convenience,
Yeah.
Yeah.
own pint, as opposed to a deliberate thing. Whereas
Yeah.
I think in
Yeah,
the
I
men's
don't.
case, it often is just deliberate.
But you would do it on holidays. You would take your book if you were on your
Yeah.
own, go out for a drink, no bother. So it is interesting that we have, they're just preconceived, like they're just inbuilt in our minds that we should or shouldn't drink pints in certain situations.
Mm,
So interesting.
it
Yeah.
is
Because
interesting.
yeah, or go to certain places. Because when I go on holiday to the west of Ireland, I walk into any old pub and just sit down and, you know, don't think twice about it. Where yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that.
And
Yeah.
now, the one place where I would easily have a pint on my own without even questioning it is the airport. So
Oh
tell
yeah.
us, tell us about airport pints, because this, is this an Irish thing, or is this universal?
I think like having a drink in the airport is universal, but I think having a pint in the airport is,
Ah,
I feel particularly Irish. And I think particularly Dublin Airport, just because that's the airport I've flown out of most of my life. And I lived in London for a decade and then Australia. Well, I didn't fly back and forth from Australia now, but when I lived in London, I would come home a lot, like sometimes every 6 weeks. And a lot of the time you had that pint. It was like, even though you could maybe have a Guinness or have a pint in London, it was like symbolic, your last proper pint of Guinness on home soil. And especially if you were going home after Christmas or something. And I write about the different occasions that you have the pints in the airport. And sometimes it's that you see that person who's maybe the returning to somewhere and having their last pint and lamenting leaving Ireland. But then there's also like such a buzz, especially in T1 in Dublin Airport. Like there always is, no matter what time you go there, 4 or 5 a.m. Like it feels like you're at a party. There's always like a hen do, a stag do, matching t-shirts, like groups of people. There's maybe the girls go on holidays, drink a prosecco, like the upstairs there where there's the smoking area. That always feels like a night out. Like you could be there at lunchtime, and it's wild. And I don't think that I never get that sense of like excitement in the bar anywhere else in any other airport. I don't think. Like even in the
hmm.
London airports that are very busy, people seem frazzled and they're like waiting, and you're in like a giraffe or Weatherspoons. But there's something, I don't know, that feels much nicer. And I have to say, the bar staff in Dublin airports, they're amazing. They always make you feel like they're proper bar staff. You could tell they have worked there. There's a proper Guinness bar there. And I think since COVID, when you started ordering from your table and your name is on your bill when they drop it over and they say your name, like, oh, there you go, enjoy the pint, Ali. And you're like, Ireland's amazing. You start to, it's
Such
those
small
little,
touches makes a
it's those,
difference.
it's those little things. But the airport pint was one I think that I wrote first, because it just, to me, it's, I fly a lot and I don't have a pint every time I go to the airport. But those times when you do make time to go for a pint, I think they're really fun.
Mm, yeah. I'm one of these people that needs to be at the airport many, many hours in advance, because I, just prefer to be there, because I'm happy to sit and wait as long as I'm there and I know I'm checked in and
Yeah.
all of the stuff. So I've always got time for an airport pint.
And now in the airport they have, like, they always had good Guinness, but now they have white hag as well, which is really nice.
Hmm.
You could go and have a few nice like pale ales before you go, which is lovely. It's nice that they're bringing in a bit more of the like local produce in there.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of that, and of different kinds of breweries, how correlated were some of your chapters or some of your observations to big brands like Guinness, Heineken, Murphy's, any of the other ones, versus kind of the smaller brands, the craft breweries?
Well, I kind of make an apology to craft brewers in the book because I only have one page on craft brewing. Because again, it's a whole other subject, but I kind of apologize because when I was writing about our culture of pints, it has traditionally been about big beer, and it still is predominantly like, craft beer has done amazingly well in Ireland, and like I am a craft beer drinker. But it doesn't have the market share for the most part. People are still drinking the big drinks. And I've had a few people like give out about that online when they've seen me drinking Guinness. Are you not supporting local? And I'm like, I literally do all the time. I write about local beers, I drink local beers. But for this subject matter, like on the front of the book, I originally, there's 3 pints. It's got images done by Stephen Heffernan. And originally that was 3 Guinness. And I was like, no, we have to like mix it up a bit. Not 3 Guinness, 3 stout. So I put a red ale, a kind of lager, and a stout, because that's what we drink. And like I needed to address that. So I suppose one of the biggest chapters in there is brand loyalty. So I mean, I don't know what your experience is because what your first pints were, but in Ireland, when you drink your first pint, you kind of pick it by brand, and that's probably going to be whoever takes you for your first pint. You're probably going to drink what they give you, or your whatever you think is the easiest thing to drink, and you tend to be very brand loyal and stick to your drink. And you drink the same thing everywhere you go because every pub in Ireland has the same 9 taps. Yeah. It was only when I went to the
Yeah.
UK when I was like 21, and all of a sudden they were like just ordering, oh, I'll just have a lager. And I was like, what kind? Who? What? Like, oh, and they'd say, oh, premium or cheap. That was how they differentiated. So they didn't care what they were drinking. I was like, that was wild. But like, did you have
That is wild.
the same experiences with your first drinks? Was it brand led or were you?
No.
No.
No, definitely. For me, it wasn't brand led at all. My parents would allow me to have, those like really overly sweet cooler type drinks, like a Bacardi Breezer, those things.
Okay.
That was kind of the start. It was like, you can have a Bacardi Breezer with some ice, go and do that. And then I distinctly remember my first beer, but it was from a can and it
Yeah.
was a lager. It was Castle Lager in South Africa, and I wasn't overly fond of it. But I grew to love beer, but I do remember that, but it wasn't brand led. It was more like I'm going to have a beer as opposed to something sweet or a wine, or maybe it was type or category led.
Yeah. What about you, Christina?
Ours was cheap. What is the cheapest thing to drink?
Yes.
Yes,
And
definitely.
you could get a case of Natty Light for like $10, which is 24 beers. Not the tall boys, the smaller ones, but still
Wow,
24
that's good value.
beers. So that's what we drank when I was legal age in college. That's what people went for because that was the end game back in the day. Now again, don't binge drink, blah blah blah, that's bad. But
Yeah,
when you're 21, like that's
but
what we did because it was cheap and you'd split it
100%.
with all your mates. Like we'd split it with like 5 of your friends or 6 or 7 of your friends or however many people were there before you went to the pub.
but I suppose in Ireland, and I mean it, and I do not condone underage drinking, but it was the norm. It was very much the norm. So like your jump from drinking cans is not that big to getting served. Because I would say I started drinking cans when I was like 14. I'd say I got served when I was 15. And that was kind of the norm in the 90s. And it's not okay. And nobody else should do that. But what we first drank was Budweiser, because in the 90s, all we cared about, everything cool was American. Like a bottle of Budweiser, if I think of it now, like it's like washing up liquid. It just tastes like soap. But that's what we thought was cool. And then I think as I started, I think I moved to Carlsberg then. Someone told me that Carlsberg was better for your hangovers than Heineken. So I just became a Carlsberg girl. And I think it was
Interesting.
a little bit cheaper. And then Guinness would have been maybe it wouldn't have been your full-time drink back then because it would have been very much the old man's drink. But definitely if you were having a pint in the middle of the day or like after college or something, you might have a Guinness. But I talk about those brands in the book. Like Guinness has the lion's share of my chapter about brand loyalty because I mean it's a nationally recognized drink around the world. It's hard not to write about it. But I write about Murphy's and Beamish, and I'm a big fan of both of those as well. And then the lagers I write about are Heineken, Carlsberg, Budweiser, because they're the ones that we would have drank. And I'm really thinking back more in the last like few decades. But I do write a lot about the beers that we kind of would have flirted with. And a lot of that was price related. So say Foster's was one that was pushed on us. Like when you were a student in Ireland in like the early 2000s, everywhere you went, there was a Foster's promotion on. So you would drink whatever was on promotion.
Yeah.
But it would always be, they wouldn't be, you'd still be brand led. And I think to this day, everyone still drinks a particular pint.
It's so interesting because like it was definitely the opposite. Like when we were growing up, like even like if when you were in the bar, like separate from like buying cans or whatever to drink at home, we would be whatever is cheapest. So like there were nights where, oh God, there was penny pitchers. Like you'd pay a penny for a pitcher of what was arguably probably just mostly water with like this much beer, but they'd tell you it was whatever. And you'd be happy, you'd be happy out. You pay your cover charge or whatever to get in and stuff like that. But yeah, or it was like $5 pitchers or whatever was the like cheapest.
And like we
was
definitely
always like the end game.
we definitely did that as well. There was like if you were on a night out, I suppose you're drinks led, right? But if you're just going to the pub, you are having your pint.
Ah, okay.
Like
But now
that,
you see that
was the difference
See,
to
that's
me.
those.
If
So
your
those
end
are
game is just to get pissed, then you're just drinking whatever you're going to get for your £10 or whatever. But if you're just having a few pints, it's a different vibe, I think.
I think for me, like that switch happened when I got into craft beer. Because in America, like the popular beers all taste about the same and it's all a bit
Yeah.
shit. To be honest, like it's just, to me, other people really enjoy them and they like that, and that's great. I love that for them. Sometimes I drink them as well, but they're not like amazing flavorful things. They're, thirst quenching or, lawnmower beer, great after, maybe in the summer or something. But for me, they're not like, oh my God, I must drink this specific brand, because they all kind of taste quite similar and nothing spectacular. Once I got into craft beer, then I probably started caring more about brands. But then it wasn't. But then it was just, oh, this is craft. And then my interest was, what's the weirdest beer I can try? So it still wasn't that loyalty to a brand. It was
novelty.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, I was going to say, especially, younger, as a younger person, I don't think that there was this idea in my head of, going to the pub or going out. They were the same thing, because South Africa, while there are pubs, it's not the same concept as Irish pubs are. So it's much more like a bar. So you do get the occasional kind of slightly quieter pub, but it's not really a thing, because most of South Africa, I mean, it's a big country, people are far away from each other. There's different kinds of places that people gather at, but bars are not the place that you can walk to. There's not like necessarily a local. So it is a bit of an out thing. So a lot of people drink at home, which is always what surprises me is that, and I know we're gonna come to it, but I'll happily drink Guinness at home, whereas I know that other people are like quite particular about where and when they drink their pint.
Yeah.
And
I like, people do drink Guinness at home, but I think not as much. Like
yes.
I would drink, I don't really drink Guinness at home. I will have craft beer at home usually, and I'll drink Guinness if I go to the pub. It's a real safe bet. You kind of, the other safety thing in ordering your brand is knowing the price and knowing the alcohol content. So you kind of know what kind of night you're going to have. So if you're going to have 4 pints of Guinness, how you're going to feel. But and I think that's what a lot of people have suffered with craft beer in Ireland after decades of drinking. Drinking beer. As someone told me the other day, I have a friend who's now working with, there's a brand called Dutch Gold. I don't know if you've heard of this.
We know them.
Dutch Gold is what we drank when we were drinking cans, because you used to get 6 for a £5. And he's recently started working with them, and he was saying that when the lagers first came, when the lager brands came into Ireland, they had to change the ABV to lower, because Irish people were so used to drinking, like Guinness is 4.2, I think, that then when you were bringing in those 5.5, like we weren't able to handle it. It was too much. So there's a safety in your brand in knowing what's going to happen you booze wise as well.
Yeah, there's
you ever
definitely
seen an
something
Irish
in there.
person when they start on the Stella and they're not used to that, and Stella is like, yeah, good.
We used to go out to a like rock and metal club, and they used to have kind of 2-for-1 student discounts. So buy two, well, buy one get one free. But we'd always try and go for the maximum ABV, given given that this was lager country and these were all big brands, but we'd go for the Carling Black Label because that was 5.5%, whereas the rest of them was sort of much more reasonable at 4.2 or 4.4. We'd go for those. We were
There's
smashed all the
a lot of
time.
mathematics involved.
Yeah. Oh no, it's funny. But so you reckon people do drink at home? It's not really part of pints culture, or is it? How does it fit in?
Not in what I've written about. The
Mm,
I mean, I remember when we were younger, you might drink at home because you couldn't afford to spend the night out in the pub, which is generally what most
fair.
people do. And then I think the one other time I talk about drinking at home was the smoking ban. So that happened like 20 years ago. And I do write a lot in the book about all the times that people said it was the end of the pub, the nail in the coffin, this is the end. And the smoking ban was one of them. Everyone was like, the pubs are going to close down. No one's going to go to the pub. And definitely for a while. Now, I lived in London at the time, but I remember coming home and then it was all of a sudden a big deal because everyone would stay at home and smoke in their houses out of like just determination not to go to the pub. But eventually that changed and the pubs got really clever and they made really great smoking areas where you didn't know you were outside. I remember there was one place in the town where I'm from, Maynooth, it was a full nightclub and the whole thing pretty much was outside, but you wouldn't know you were outside apart from people were smoking. So there was all these rules where you could just have like a gap in the wall and it would be an
Mm,
indoor area. So I write about drinking at home only in that capacity, really.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I do drink at home. And also, I think a big part of writing this and why pints have become such a a moment in the last few years has to be to do with lockdown when we could drink at home as much as we wanted. And actually, it was very handy because you didn't have to get dressed or go out and you could just fall into bed. And I did it a lot from this desk here where we're on Zoom. But the thing we missed was it wasn't the drink that we missed. It was
Mm,
the act of going for a pint. It was pinting. It was the pub. It was the people. It was the ritual. It was all of those things that were nothing to do with the alcohol was what we missed about pints and the pubs. And I think that that kind of is in part why stuff like my book, stuff like Shit London Guinness, stuff like Heffy, who's done my illustrations, a lot of why they took off was because we all tapped into that nostalgia and love that we have for pints that you cannot recreate at home. I don't think you can.
mm,
I tried. I got the jewelry cleaner and before the nitro surge existed and
yeah.
everyone was trying to recreate their Guinness at home. I did all that and it just wasn't the same.
No, it isn't the same. I have noticed with colleagues, friends, whatnot, that there is something specific about drinking at home. As you say, you can drink kind of certain things at home. Guinness, not so much. Guinness is like a pub drink.
Yeah.
People, I think, feel it if that's their brand, but that's where they feel like the ritual ties in. Now, because I've never had that, I'll happily drink Guinness at home. It's on regular
Yeah.
rotation. I've got no notions about where it needs to be drank. Like,
And to be
not a
fair,
thing.
it doesn't taste, the thing is you might not have a clean glass or you might not pour it the right way they will in the pub, but the actual drink itself is not going to taste drastically different your can at home to your
Mm,
pub. I
yeah,
mean, people
the
will say
ritual's
it would,
different though.
but I have to say one of the things I like really, and I hope I got across, and that this book is not about Guinness, and I'm definitely not like a Guinness
Mm, mm,
snob. Like I have a chapter in here that kind of takes the piss out of pint experts because the proliferation of Guinness and pint experts on social media over the last few years, like it would just bore you to tears. And the way we talk about it, like it's nouvelle cuisine or like fine art or like the reason Guinness does so well is because it's a really consistent commercially made drink and it tastes the same everywhere you go and it's delicious and it ticks all the boxes. But I never feel the need to, I suppose, critique it the way that other people in our realm do. I don't know
mm.
what you guys think about that.
You go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think a lot of with pints in general, I think a lot of it is people forget how much, and we've talked about this on the podcast a lot, that the environment in which you're consuming the pint can influence how much you like the pint, as well as nostalgia. So, you know, if you have really good memories, and I'm sure you talk about this in the book, of like drinking pints in pubs and drinking Guinness in a pub, then your pint of Guinness is going to taste better in the pub, because
Yeah.
that's where you get this rush of nostalgia. You get, you know, the vibes, even like it changes so much when you have some kind of imprint with, you know, some ritual that you, for you, you know, that means a lot to you. You're going to like the pint better there. And I think even just the ritual of pouring pints in specific ways also just reinforces this idea. And it's, you know, it may be a placebo effect. You know, it might not actually have anything physically different in the pint, but it lights up different parts of your brain or whatever,
Yeah.
and so therefore the pint tastes better. And I don't think there's anything, you know, wrong with that. It certainly affects me. I know that, you know, drinking certain things in the sunshine, I, you know, have more, oh, this is the best pint ever because it's sunny, it's, you know, whatever degrees out, and you know, it's wonderful, so this is an amazing pint. And you know, then that will just trigger memories, oh, later down the road, oh, it's not quite as good, oh right, because I'm not drinking it in the sunshine,
Yeah.
or you know, with my friends. So I do definitely think the culture, the rituals, and the place have a lot to do with how good a pint can be.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. You know, I think the other thought that I had on that was people within craft spaces, or, you know, just trying to elevate themselves above what is mainstream or what is, you know, mass produced. There's a place for that, but there is also a place for these mass produced, very consistent, very skillfully produced things, whether it's food or beer or vodka or wine or whatever the case is. There is absolutely a place for this. As a home brewer, slightly
Yeah.
occasional, but I cannot express to you how difficult it is to brew the same beer over and over
Yeah.
and over again, to have it almost never change, to have it be completely predictable and exactly what people want in that moment. There is such gold in that, and it is extremely skillful. So you don't have to like it, you don't have to drink it, but
Yeah.
I don't think that there is any need for being a bit kind of snobby about the whole thing. There's just no need for it.
And I think there's not enough, like I always say, you can be both. Like I was saying that someone commented on something on social media and giving out that maybe I wasn't promoting local beers. And I'm like, well, I can have a pint of Guinness in this photo, but if you know about any of the other work that I do, like it's all about Irish independent businesses. And like you can go out for a pint of Guinness and I can spend €50 a week on craft beers as well. Like both things can be true. And
Yeah.
Exactly.
and I think that as well. I think that like I can write a book about pints and about Guinness and not be that particular about my pint having to be, well, I am. I'm as particular as the next person, but I don't have to critique every pint of Guinness that I have. Your first pint, maybe you're like, oh, look, that's beautiful. Look at the stick on that. Oh, look at the head. But like you've had two more, you're like, you're just drinking it. You don't, you know, it's alcohol at the end of the day. And I think that one thing I do always say about this is like, I couldn't have written this about vodka Red Bull. You don't take photos of that and put it on your Instagram and go, look at me, I'm having a great time. Look at me, this is well earned. Like those things around the pint, like you said, the nostalgia, the culture, the customs, like they all go towards it. It's
Mm.
like, and as I said, I could have written like twice as much about it, and maybe I'll write another one.
I was gonna say
Maybe
volume
you should. Yeah,
two.
volume two. Yeah, no,
Volume.
and you know, I think as you were saying there, Ali, I don't think that everybody has the intention of sitting and having their drinks, pints or otherwise, with the express intention of overthinking it. Like
Oh,
sometimes you just want
Yeah.
to sit and drink a little, like socialize.
Yeah.
Actually, your focus is on your friends or on
yeah.
your book or on whatever you're doing. Sometimes it's not about what you're drinking, it's just part of it, you know?
And that's what it is for the majority
Exactly.
of people. Like we
Yeah.
live in bubbles because we live in this world
Mm.
and we live and breathe drink. So yeah, the majority
Yeah.
of people are just looking for at something tasty and reliable and yeah, to have a nice time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'll put my hands up. I'm a beer judge, and I do not judge beer in my free time. Like if I
Same.
get, you know, if I get poured a pint, as long as it's not like completely infected, it's fine. Like, you know, I'm not. I'm not that picky. I'm just really not that picky because, you know, when I'm out with my friends, I'm there to be with my friends. And if I get a really great beer, then I will remember that really great beer. But if the rest of them are just okay, then that's
Yeah.
okay. You know, I
Mm.
just won't, you know, gush about it on the internet and say it's, you know, amazing when it isn't. But I'm there to enjoy my friends and, you know,
Mm.
time with them,
I
like you
do
said.
I do enjoy the slating of, like I mentioned it there to you, the shit London Guinness. Do you know that Instagram
It's
account?
actually very funny. That
Like,
that I must say is very funny.
I very much enjoy the slating of that because, like, you know, as an Irish person, like it's very simple to get pints right. And then when you go to other places and they just mess them up. And you were saying that about glasses. Like I write in here about like my very first pub job. The first thing I was taught that like no matter what happens, you never put the wrong beer in the wrong glass. It has to be the correct branded glass. And if you don't, you know, you don't put the Harp in a Smithwick's glass. And if you run out of Harp glasses, if they're in the dishwasher, you have another section of plain glasses, and they're like the tulip ones. And the very
Mm.
worst ones you can use is the nonic one, you know, so there's a hierarchy to a glass from when I was like 16 years old. And we were taught how to wash them and how to wash the water and how to dry them. And like the beer mats, to make sure you always put a beer mat under a pint. And that doesn't happen outside of Ireland. And you see that when you go to somewhere else and you end up with soggy sleeves.
Mm.
Can't understand why there's no beer mat. We are very, yeah, we are like, yeah, I'll drink any pint, but also I'll drink any pint as long as it is at the correct temperature in the correct glass with a beer mat and served in a timely manner.
And I mean it just it, there are whole accounts, there are people dedicated to finding the best pint of, you know,
Yeah,
mostly Guinness, but pint of this in places, because as much as it's a very consistent product, it can pour differently in different places. Nitrogen, you know, can change based on bartenders' likes and dislikes. So it is interesting because it can be as simple as I just want to go for pints, or it can be let's find the best version of this with the right glassware, the right bar mats, the right everything. It
but it's
is,
very easy.
you know,
But
it's a
it
whole
is very
thing.
easy to find that in Ireland. Like it is like, will I go to that pub or that pub? Like it's not. They're not unicorns to find a pub with a great pint and that has all those things around you. Like we're still lucky that most towns have a proper pub like that. And that's when I talk
Mm.
about when I say the old man's pub, the proper pub. Like it's ticking all those boxes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So now a lot of your chapters, I'm guessing, were things that you observed or that you experienced. What was the most sort of fun research that you did? Did you have to kind of supplement it? Did you talk to
Yeah.
people? Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, and I did, like I'm an over researcher. I really enjoy going to the library and reading a lot of books, and lots of other people have done a lot more research than me, and certainly a lot of the websites as well. Like I used a lot of like there's one Publin, Brand New Retro, and they have old, even reading old newspaper articles and stuff. But my favorite one was, and actually it's in the very backwoods because I needed something for Z. So you know, I said I did an A to Z. So I did, I'll just remember it here while I have it in front of me, the zoo and pints, because I was like, what am I going to? So I literally would Google, like I have a newspaper search engine. And yeah, that was basically Patrick Kavanagh went to the pub. So you know, in Ireland, you used to not be able to get a pint on Good Friday. So that
Mm.
was a very big
Yeah.
deal. So you go, it only ended like a few years ago that we were allowed to drink on Good
Mm.
Friday. So you might go to a train station, you could book into a hotel. Some people will get the ferry to Wales to drink. But Patrick Kavanagh, I think I'm going to get the date here so don't forget, in the 1840s when Dublin Zoo decided that they would have a bar and open after mass. And yeah, Patrick Kavanagh went to the zoo on Good Friday to get a pint. So that was like, I think, my favorite thing. And I found that from, I think it was Publin.ie, which is like an amazing website. He just catalogs loads of stuff. But there was people like that, that his website was really helpful. Donald Fallon, who I don't know if you know Donald, like incredibly generous with his time and his research and his history. And to learn about the history of Grogan's, which is one of
Mm.
my favorite pubs that I always loved, but
A lovely pub.
to learn that Grogan's was one of the first and most welcoming spaces to women in Dublin. that they were one of the first places in the 60s that let women drink in there on their own with their groups of friends and actively encouraged them. And there was loads of little stories like that make you appreciate the pubs that you love even more, because they all have such good stories. And like, I
Yeah.
don't think I had written about this in an article while I was researching the book, but there's an architect called Roisin Murphy who had done a documentary talking about preserving our pubs, suggesting that we should apply for them to be UNESCO sites of heritage. And the Vintners Association have apparently started that process, because the pubs are so unique and like they are living museums, and it would be amazing if we could find a way to protect them more. But I don't know if that's going to happen. But finding out all of that information was like, so a lot of it is my stories and humor and crack, but then a lot of it is, I think, quite important research and stuff that I wanted to put in a book and go, this is why pubs are
Yeah.
brilliant and this is why pints are great. Yeah.
I cannot wait to read it. Were
Me
there any
too. I'm so
I
excited.
know. I mean, last question from me really, but were there any customs or traditions that you learned for the first time, besides the zoo one, now that you've mentioned, but anything that you hadn't directly experienced?
Um, Maybe like St. Patrick's Day. Um, and I read about this. I have a brilliant, there's a Dr. Marion McGarry. She writes a lot about Irish social history. And a thing called drowning the shamrock, which I didn't know was a thing, put a porrig, where you'd put your shamrock in the drink and throw it over your shoulder. That was a tradition, St. Patrick's Day, I didn't know about. But I also didn't know that our St. Patrick's Day parades were invented by the temperance movement. So, like, you know, the way Paddy's Day is thought of as a big boozy day, and it's really boozier, I always think, in the rest of the world than it is in Ireland. But I think how it got that reputation was when a lot of Irish left and went to America. But it was around the time of prohibition and temperance. And to encourage people not to drink, they were like, let's have parades to have something else to do. So I didn't know that our St. Patrick's Day parade came from the temperance movement, which was interesting.
So many things came from the temperance movement. We've spoken a little on this podcast about prohibition and temperance, like littered into other subjects. But the more we dive into random history about stuff, the more temperance movement comes up. It's unbelievable.
And I think that it was something that makes, like, I always, there's few things that go towards the reason we are so particular about hospitality and pints. And I think that the temperance movement was a part of that, because they tried to take it away from us. Like, we didn't have prohibition, but they were like, drinking's not good, hide your drink. We went back to drinking in our houses, to she beans and stuff like that. And it made, to, you know, for people like me, that makes me want to drink even more. Like, and
Definitely.
I write about, you guys might not know about this, but in Ireland, when you make your confirmation, you take a pledge. So you're supposed to take a pledge when you make a confirmation and say that you're not going to drink until you're 18. And across the board, everyone who makes their confirmation, which is a lot of people in Ireland, maybe not so much anymore, but when I was younger, and you're supposed to pledge not to drink until you're 18, and everybody breaks that pledge. But I feel like that's a hangover. Well, it is. It's a hangover from the temperance. And I always felt that the minute you make that pledge at your confirmation is the minute you start thinking about when you're going to have your first drink. I don't think I thought about it until my confirmation. And when someone said, you're not going to be allowed to drink for 6 years, I was like, oh, what's this drinking then?
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I went through the processes, confirmation and communion and all of that, but we didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Didn't
I
have
think
to have that pledge. So,
I think it's an Irish thing. Yeah.
interesting. I know that you mentioned there's a lot of kind of religious or ecumenical, did I say that word right? Connections and hangovers kind of between pint culture. I don't want to dive into it too much because we've got to leave juicy, fun things for the book.
Yeah.
But there is an article that we'll link in the show notes for anybody who does want to taste her, because he did write about it there recently.
About funerals. Yeah.
Yes, about funerals. It was really interesting because, and again, you know, foreigner hand up here, but I've never been to an Irish funeral or wake. I know, lucky, I guess lucky me because,
Well, you haven't lived.
yes, um, but I've never been to a wake or a funeral. I have been to one in Ireland, but not of an Irish person, so it's a bit different. So I don't know all these customs, and I really appreciated learning a few of the things because Man, I've got no idea. I'm gonna make a fool out of myself
No,
one day
just
when I.
always bring food and just, yeah, bring food and drink and you'll be fine. But
Awesome.
yeah, I mean, they're very, very sad occasions, obviously, funerals,
Mm,
but I do write about like there's something in those, if you go to the pub and you have, whether it's the pub or a cup of tea, it doesn't matter, but the hospitality that you have after a funeral in Ireland, I find really comforting. Because like that, I've gone to funerals in the UK and in Australia, and I was like, is that it? Like, when do we kind of get to sit and talk about the person? And it feels, I don't know, it feels more emotional and comforting, I think, to have some hospitality after an event like that. But yeah, it's
yeah.
very Irish.
As Irish as looking at RIP or RIP.ie every day, which is, yeah, still baffles me. But that's a thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. That's I call
I
it
appreciate it.
my dad's social media.
Oh, I appreciate it. So, okay, Ali, where can people find your book? Where can people follow you? Let's get all of your details listed. We'll obviously have them in the show notes, but let's get them on the audio.
So the book you can get from Nine Bean Rose is the publisher, but also it should be now in most good bookshops. So I know it's in Independence and in Eason's and Dubray and Kenny's and all of those. Um, you can find me mostly on Instagram, Ali Dunworth, and I kind of share lots of stuff on there. And also I Substack now. I don't know if that's the right term. I Substack. I have a Substack called The Kitchen Press, and every week I share Irish hospitality news on a Friday usually. So that's like food and drink news and events and stuff. And then I'll be hopefully all over Ireland talking about the book over the summer at the various festivals. Hopefully I'll see you guys at some of them.
Definitely. That sounds awesome. By the way, I was today years old when I learned about Substack. So, yes, I was on your Instagram and I was like, what is Substack? So I'm going to go and learn more about that and do the
Apparently,
things. But
yeah,
yes.
apparently it's the big new thing, but it's
Hmm.
fun. It's good. It's nice. And you'll find lots of people that you want to read on there, which is good.
Interesting. Okay, well, awesome. Christina, friend, do you have any more questions or things to add here now? No?
No, I just can't wait to read the book. I'm so excited.
No, me too, me too. And Ali, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. This has been so fun, and love to have a pint with you, even if it's over Zoom,
Yeah,
and real pints soon in person.
definitely.
You know,
Yeah.
we'll have to do that. I wonder actually if you had a chapter of pints soon that never actually happened. I hope it's not one of those.
But that was one of the ones I was like, oh my God, there was loads. Someone was like, oh, I missed warm pints. I missed seafood. We're definitely going to have that pints. Yeah, there's a lot. Maybe I'll
All
have.
of those. Ah, I love the theme of this book. I really can't wait to read it. But for those listening or watching at home, check out our show notes because we'll have all the links to go and buy the book, follow Ali on all of the various things. And yeah, Ali, we can only thank you. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.